Hey everyone, this is part 5 of my Criticisms of Young Earth Creation series, and it's going to deal with an issue that occurred to me a while back that I never see really covered by Young Earth Creationist apologists, which is where would all the floodwaters have gone? So we basically have a situation where water capable of covering the highest mountain peaks in the world couldn't have just vanished without a trace. The big problem is that the Bible is somewhat specific about where this water came from. It says the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven, and that seems okay. I mean, it's pretty specific. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm going to say that I'm not convinced by most of the Young Earth Creationist ideas about where this water came from, whether that be runaway subduction or basically a vapor canopy. But let's just, for the point of this video, assume that all this water was somehow able to cover the earth. This would leave us with a few options. Possibility 1. The floodwaters receded into the northern and southern hemispheres, creating the glaciers. This may or may not be how creationists explain the Ice Age, but I find this problematic. Even at their most thick, the water contained in the Ice Age glaciers would not have covered every landmass on the planet. The Bible is very clear that everywhere on the earth was covered up to the highest mountains. Now, the melting of these glaciers surely would cover pretty much, if these glaciers were to melt, they would pretty much cover many coastal areas, but if I'm not mistaken, many of the inland areas would still be above land, leaving plenty of room for the very, very wicked people and apparently very, very wicked animals that God needed to kill of Noah's days to flee to. Possibility 2, the water evaporated. I find this problematic because the kind of heat required to turn that much water into a gaseous form over such a short amount of time would have surely killed the passengers aboard the ark and quite possibly set that boat, which was supposedly made of gopher wood, on fire. Basically, you have the kind of heat that would be necessary to evaporate a global ocean over the course of around 2 months, which is according to the Bible, from the day that it stopped raining to when Noah and his family stepped off the ark was about 2 months. It would have been enormous. There's also no reason to believe that such a process wouldn't take oceans and rivers and lakes and other bodies of water with them, thus eradicating all of the aquatic life in the world. In addition, the post-flood world would have suffered from a tremendously large vapor canopy hanging over the earth. I don't think it would be a stretch of the imagination to say that if such a thing existed, our planet would have been a lot more like Venus than it is like the Earth we know today. It basically would have had a runaway greenhouse effect. There's also the issue of water pressure. Consider how much physical pressure being underneath a global ocean, basically suspended up in the sky, how much pressure that would put on terrestrial life. Consider how intense water pressure gets when you dive a few miles into the ocean. Now imagine how intense it would be if basically you had all this water suspended in the atmosphere. Possibility 4, the water went underground. This is the one I'm not so sure about, and this is the one I don't have as much information about. If any creationists want to tell me that there's evidence of a world-spanning body of water existing beneath the Earth's surface, I'd be happy to hear it, and I'd also like to hear how, if this body of water exists, if it could cover pretty much the entire ocean, if it was, or the entire world, if it was unleashed onto the planet. Possibility 4, it drained away into the oceans. I find this difficult to believe because that would have meant a dramatic change in salinity levels, and some forms of aquatic life are very sensitive to salinity changes, and so it would have wiped them out. And I had dealt with this in a previous video, so I'm not going to touch on it too much here. So you can look at my previous video. Possibility 5, it was blown away. Genesis chapter 8, verse 1 says God caused a wind to pass over the earth to make the floodwaters subside. But the question is, how does wind get rid of water? Much less, how would the inhabitants of the ark have survived what would have certainly been a global hurricane alongside a global flood? much less the marine life, who would have to deal with this as well. Possibility 6, it was a supernatural event and doesn't have to line up with the natural laws, i.e. God did it, which is a classic tried and true creationist defense. I have a friend who has a big problem with this creation science movement for this very reason. This same friend I mentioned in my last video, who's a basically Reformed theology, Calvinist sort of guy, claims that God is so omnipotent and he's such a powerful supernatural being that he can do whatever he wants without having to obey the laws of the universe that he made in the first place. I held similar beliefs for a long time, but I eventually realized that if we're going to allow the supernatural into these kind of explanations of why the natural world is the way it is, then we pretty much have to give a certain degree of credibility to all the world's creation myths. Even creation myths, flood myths, even a lot of the deities that seem pretty absurd to a lot of us, for example Ganesh and his elephant head, are suddenly valid because they're supernatural beings. They don't have to really obey the laws of physics or chemistry or biology or any of the physical sciences. This is a problem with the creation science movement because it wants to have it both ways. It wants to present itself as a legitimate scientific theory, but also wants to have the option to make an appeal to magic whenever it wants to. A scientifically plausible idea does not need to constantly appeal to magic to make it valid. Anyway, if there's any explanations that I've left out, let me know. Hopefully I'll be able to do a creationist video eventually on catastrophic plate tectonics and ideas about runaway subduction and all that. But yeah, anyway, I'm out, and as always, answer the questions by questioning the answers. Later.